Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mitma De Silva, and I am going to be conducting an audio brief on the post-poll political environment in Indonesia. Today, I'm joined by Uday Bakshi and our analyst, Dr. Ramu. The post-election environment in Indonesia, which has reflected a very complicated political landscape, has been very interesting and been on everyone's minds over the past few weeks. The elections which took place on February 14th, so Prabowo Subianto, who is a former army general, as well as the current Minister of Defense, emerging as the likely winner of the presidential elections. He has secured around 58% of the votes, and he is supported by Gibran Rakabuming Raka. And an interesting point to note about him is that he is President Joko Widodo's son, and he is purported to be the vice presidential candidate. So, in this interesting political environment, I would like to bring in Uday Bakshi to talk about the existing political environment in Indonesia, as well as the incumbent President Joko Widodo's support for Prabowo Subianto. Uday?
Right. Interesting question, Mitma. So just talking about Jokowi himself, let's look at his kind of, I guess, the word I'm looking for is involvement or meddling, really, in the electoral process over the last 2 years. There have been attempts by his administration to delay the elections and to change the constitution. Now those failed. So the elections were held as scheduled, and for that, Jokowi teamed up with his longtime rival turned friend, General Prabowo Subianto. One of the most controversial decisions was the fact that Jokowi's son, Gibran Rakabuming, was chosen as Prabowo's vice president after a controversial constitutional court ruling, which lowered the minimum age requirements from 40 to 35. Gibran is 36. So the head of the Constitutional Court at that time was Jokowi's brother-in-law. So there was, direct involvement, and this is set off a few legal cases. But as it stands, this political alliance right now is the coming together of Prabowo's political dynasty and Jokowi's emerging dynasty, which he has been trying to cement over the last couple of years. This has also raised questions about the decline of democracy in Indonesia since 2019, especially. President Jokowi has cracked down on dissent. He's introduced controversial laws without the necessary due process. Indonesia's criminal code has been amended to reflect penalties for criticizing the state and president and other things like that. So going into these elections, there were real questions about the status of Indonesia's democracy and how it will go ahead and how it will look ahead. Has Indonesia turned into an authoritarian state? That's not true. Indonesia is still a very strong democracy, albeit very flawed. But the main concern here is with the entrenchment of these political elites. They have been trying to chip away at some of the democratic progress made in the last 20 years. For example, one of the biggest parties in the country, the Indonesian Democratic Party of Struggle, the PDI-P, had last year proposed that the presidential elections not be direct elections anymore. Rather, people would vote for parties, and parties would then select the presidential candidate or select the president. This was done before the Reformasi, in the early Reformasi era, and it was proved to be widely unpopular, but it was a way for the elite to control the system. So that's the real concern going ahead, is the downsliding of democracy. Indonesia still is a democracy, but the checks and balances are eroding, and that is a concern moving ahead. Mitma, speaking of the Indonesian Democratic Party of Struggle, I understand it's come out as, well, it was opposing Prabowo Subianto, and it's come out as one of the strongest parties in the legislative elections. So, can you tell us about what PDI-P is going to do? Is it looking to align with the government, or is it looking to be in the opposition? That would be a
Yes.
real test for the country's democracy, I feel.
Yeah, that is a very good question. So although we are not going to get the official results until March, there are various quick counts from various survey institutions that show that the PDIP has actually performed really well in the legislative arena. So far, there are unofficial counts that show that the opposition collectively won around 46% of the legislature's 580 seats. This is while Prabowo's alliance only secured 42%. So, like you said, this sort of puts the PDIP in a very important position. And it is at crossroads at the moment, I believe so. And earlier, Uday, you talked about the political dynasty and democracy in Indonesia. So the alliance between Prabowo and President Jokowi also shows the clash between like the new and older political dynasties. Earlier, when President Joko Widodo rose within the PDIP, it sort of challenged the traditional power structures, which arose certain tensions within the PDIP. So Megawati Sukarnoputty, former president and the leader of the PDIP, she chose to support Ganja, and this also reflects her determination to show authority in the Indonesian political environment. So when Jokowi actually endorsed Prabowo for implicitly endorsed Prabowo for these elections. This sort of challenged the established norms and alliances. So right now, the uh, right now Prabowo's role is to actually secure support for his political alliance, because as it stands right now, the opposition has the majority. So Prabowo will be facing certain challenges when he's trying to implement his policies. So um, I'd actually like to bring in your opinion for the position of the PDIP nowadays, and what are the options that are available for them, and how do you see Prabowo maneuvering these challenges?
Right. Okay, so the options available for PDIP are either that they join the government or they form, they remain in the opposition and they lead the opposition. In the former case, this will represent a government that will be similar to President Jokowi's 2019 tenure, to the current administration, in which Jokowi had a super majority in parliament, which allowed him basically to pass whatever laws, which without much opposition. The only opposition had come from the Democrats and the PKS, the Prosperous Justice Party, I think. Um, but if PDIP decides to be in the opposition, then pushing policies and continuing Jokowi's policies will be a lot tougher for Prabowo, especially as you mentioned Megawati. She has been the kingmaker for the past 10 years, backing Jokowi in the elections. In this election, she lost as Jokowi had more influence than her, but she still has power across the legislative bodies. So she could be quite the impediment to Prabowo's governance.
And
Unless,
I'd also
sorry,
like
yeah,
to bring in the several series of meetings that President Widodo has been having with various political party members. So it was reported that he met with the Nasdem party leader, and that he also attempted to secure several meetings with Megawati, which has been unsuccessful so far. So it is possible,
right.
like you said, that he will try to gain support from parties like the National Awakening Party and the NASDEM Party. Just
Yeah,
wanted
but
to
for
add that.
PDIP, yep, but for PDIP, it really depends on Megawati's mood and whether she sees uh allying with Prabowo and Jokowi, who has, betrayed her, um, whether she sees that as more profitable than being in the opposition and controlling the legislation, um, and preparing for the next elections in 2019. Sorry, 2029.
Of course.
Um, so before we go on to 2029, Ramu, can you just tell us what a Prabowo presidency would look like in terms of, the economic policies or related matters?
Yeah, thanks, Uday. So as far as we could see from here, so Prabowo, he has pledged to continue most of President Jokowi's policies. I mean, especially in the economic sphere and also in terms of the relocation of the capital from Jakarta to Nusantara in East Kalimantan. Most importantly, in the economic policies, Prabowo has pledged to continue and improve upon the downstreaming policies, not just in the resources sector, but also in the marine sector, and even for that matter, in the agro and food sectors. And attesting to this particular fact is the statement, like yesterday only it came out from the incumbent investment minister, Balil Lahadalia, that no special transition team will be required if Prabowo wins the presidency, which is kind of like a tacit approval from the part of the administration in terms of smoothening the transition. Um, and it also like gives hope to the to Prabowo's campaign commitment to continue the current government's policies. And obviously, with Prabowo leading the polls at over 58% as of how things stand right now, Balil has also pointed to the involvement of current cabinet ministers in the campaign as an evidence of this so-called smooth transition. So the administration is like the Jokowi administration is already like coordinating on some of Prabowo's campaign promises, like the free meal program, which basically underlines a seamless handover, while also reinforcing that cabinet appointments remain the president's decision as an executive power. Um, in terms of the downstreaming policy, there is much debate surrounding how much it is oriented as a nationalist policy, but at the same time, how much it benefits China as a major foreign investor, because many of the nickel ore processing companies, the companies that are involved in the metallurgical processing of the nickel ore, are Chinese, and basically engendering them a free hand in terms of controlling the global supply chains when it comes to the electric vehicle and the battery industry. And Prabowo being more of like a former general and having a hawkish view in terms of security policies and in terms of the security architecture in the region and in the neighboring South China Sea, he's also quoting Western defense manufacturers in terms of like augmenting the purchases of defense equipments and arms from the United States and other Western countries. In terms of more social political ventures, I mean, he has already like pledged to generate around 19 million new jobs, establish a state revenue agency to increase the state revenue to GDP ratio to almost 23%, which again remains to be seen, because these are, as of now, these are election promises. And other social welfare measures include eradication of extreme poverty within 2 years of taking office. He also aims for self-sufficiency in food, energy, and water, which is kind of critical because Indonesia has been reeling from a sort of a food scarcity or a food crisis mostly because of the onset of the El Nino, climatic conditions. Kind of like gave way to like a prolonged drought period and affected the Indonesian agricultural production. So the current administration of Jokowi has pledged to give more subsidies in terms of fertilizers, which are very essential for the farming community, but at the same time trying to balance that with increasing imports of essential grains like rice. So it remains to be seen how much Prabowo is going to continue with such policies. He has advocated for a stronger palm oil sector because Indonesia is one of the biggest producers of palm oil in the world, and it's a major source of biofuel also. And also, he has pledged to increase its component in the biofuel mixture, especially in fuel outlets, in terms of mixing the proportion of biofuel with ordinary petroleum products like gasoline or diesel for that matter. Yeah. So, and in terms of addressing labor issues, Prabowo has pledged to establish a task force to review restrictions on foreign workers and audit the mining industry, which is a major source of investment as well as revenue making for the Indonesian government. And he will be particularly focusing on worker condition in the nickel sector, which is in light of the recent explosions that occurred in Chinese-owned smelter facility in the Sulawesi region. Um, yeah, I mean, so I think I've told enough about most the economic aspects of Prabowo's likely Prabowo presidency, but at the same time, many of the experts have said that yeah, Prabowo is very likely to continue Jokowi administration policies, but being the former general and the at one point larger than life figure that he was, there are still skepticisms as to whether he will, align with most of Djokovic's policies in terms of the China factor. So maybe like I will open the floor to either of you, Uday or Mitma, if you have any comments to pitch in on this particular aspect.
Great. Thanks, Ramu. I think you've kind of touched upon that. I think so with Jokowi's administration, we've seen a lot of investment coming in. Jokowi has focused on, large scale infrastructure development, and a lot of the investment that has been brought in has been from China. Prabowo, as you rightly said, is a bit more hawkish than Jokowi. Um, he has kind of indicated that, he will continue with getting investments from China, but he'll also look to diversify this. Because the South China Sea tensions with Indonesia, they are increasing. There's more Chinese fishing vessels, research vessels, and Coast Guard vessels in Indonesia's exclusive economic zone. And Prabowo, coming from a defense and army mindset, he would likely take a tougher stance. So we might see some scaling down on the dependency that Jokowi has had with China. Because in this case, a lot of he would want to hedge against, the economic dependency by creating a more robust security infrastructure that is more aligned with the West in a sense. Prabowo has had a history of being more friendly towards the West, and even as defense minister, he's gone to the US several times for defense deals, and he does want to procure Western armaments to modernize the military. The South China Sea dispute, I mean, there's no easy resolution for that. What I'd just like to mention, because we're talking about security, just looking back at Indonesia within its geographical borders, and Mithra, maybe you have something to say about this also. But looking at a Prabowo presidency on the state of West Papua, I don't think that there's going to be much hopes for toning down the conflict that has, escalated at an unprecedented degree during Jokowi's tenure. The insurgency is now at its highest point than it ever has been in its decades-long history. And the West Papuan National Liberation Army is stronger and better armed and more capable than it ever has been. So Prabowo, given his, background of human rights abuses and operations in Papua and Timor-Leste, and his, playbook of his military playbook, I don't see the situation in Papua getting better at all. At best, it will continue to worsen. Mithma, would you have any comments about the security environment in Papua with Prabowo?
Yes, so I think, like you said, it is unlikely considering Prabowo's military history and human rights abuses, and considering that he takes a more hardline approach on these things, it is unlikely that the situation in Papua will tend to increase. And this is especially as there is an ongoing hostage situation in Papua as we speak. So yes, and speaking of security, I think one of the reasons that the post election situation in Indonesia is so important is when considering when considering the violence in Indonesia following the 2019 elections. Um, uh, what is the possibility of such tensions arising in Indonesia right now, or do you think the time for such unrest or violence has passed as of now?
Um, yeah, good question. So, I mean, the 2019 elections, as the recent elections also were quite polarizing. But in 2019, what the difference was is that, Prabowo rejected the election quick counts and the polls that had come out. And in a kind of, I believe, Dr. Ramo, you said, a Donald Trump manner, he question the results and call the supporters to riot and, come out on the streets. We're not going to see that this time. Uh, the elections have been largely free and fair, at least on voting day. The whole electoral process, and Jokowi's involvement, will raise questions about the free and fair aspect. But in terms of political violence, not much at the moment on the horizon. This will be a smooth transition, and there are a lot of underlying tensions, but they haven't boiled up to the point where, they would motivate outright violence between different political camps at the moment. So not likely to see that in the coming months over the elections. Does that answer your question, Batma?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Dr. Ramo, any final comments from you or Mitma before we round up this discussion here?
It's good from my end, Uday. Thank you.
All right.
Mitma? All right. I don't think Mitma has any comment to take. So please, Uday, wrap it up.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for joining us, Ramo and Mitma, today. This was really interesting. We produced an assessment on the Indonesian election. We have produced a couple assessments on the Indonesian elections in recent weeks. So you can contact us to check that out. Thank you everyone for listening in. And once again, Ramu and Mitma, thank you for your insights and inputs on this discussion.
Thank you.